and vegetation. I just want to start by saying botany is lifelong learning. Even after 2 decades, I don't pretend to know half of what I should. As botanists, we work with flora and vegetation, which are actually 2 related but separate disciplines. I'll be concentrating on vegetation as the least well known and understood of the 2. So it was a pretty big topic to break down. I chose those four themes, hoping to cover most of the issues. They cross over. There are legacy issues in some of these that are bigger than any of us, but they still have to be looked at. I think that how someone perceives their role affects the kind of work they produce, and increasingly this is a question I'm asking myself on a regular basis, sometimes in colourful language. Often as a consultant, the view is that your role is to gain approvals for your client. But like Declan said yesterday, the A in EIA doesn't stand for approvals. It's a legal process and there are responsibilities we have under the EP Act. I have struggled with the question of what exactly our role is, role and responsibilities are. This clause that Declan also referred to would indicate that we are at least required to provide factual information. So for those not familiar with these are the limitation statements in our EIA botanical reports. This is a requirement of our guidance material that we provide this. These were from the first 3 reports I looked up, so it's not an uncommon thing. I mean, to me, this there is a flippancy here that indicates that we either don't understand our role, or we do understand it and we don't really take it seriously. All botanical surveys have limitations. We're working in a poorly known part of the world that is diverse on multiple measures, and we never have enough time. In addition, out-of-season surveys often have no limitations for seasonality. High-level mapping, such as beard, is used to support no limitations for contextual information. There are other implications as well. Nothing will improve while EIA botanists are pretending everything is fine. So our role is not only to collect plot data, but to use it for its intended purpose, to add it to a reference plot data set and run a floristic analysis to demonstrate how common or restricted our vegetation is. Restricted vegetation is significant vegetation in EIA. We're not actually able to do this because WA has no reference plot database. This should be noted as a limitation for contextual information in every plot-based survey. We might even get that database quicker if we're communicating its absence. Excuse me. Scoping covers a lot of ground for EIA botanists. Our old technical guidance was clear on what level of a survey was required. For example, 5 hectares in the Avon wheat belt required a level 2 plot-based survey. It gave you leverage to demonstrate why a minimum of work was required. Our new technical guidance is more open to interpretation. I maintain that even after the discussion yesterday. I've been told that formal scoping will instead identify the work required of us. Though that is only relevant to the Part 4 process, most of our work comes through clearing permits. And then scoping directives, when we do get them, are quite often meaningless. What does do a flora survey mean? Our technical guidance uses specific language for methodology and level of survey, and we really need people to use that language. And if you ask for direction on scope from agencies, you're likely to get, "Oh, you guys know best," which is a nice vote of confidence, except the proponent will likely take the advice of the consultant offering the cheapest solution. To put cheapest into context, this is the outcome of two competitive tenders. Those amounts might look large for those not involved in the process. It's very time-consuming work, and there are, over and above ordinary overheads, there are a lot of fieldwork expenses included in those amounts. Both of these were for a level 1 fauna survey, and then there were various creative interpretations of the works for flora and vegetation. The first example was for the planning processes on the Swan Coastal Plain. The fauna component in my proposal was more than the total of the winning bid. Example 2 was for minerals exploration in remote WA. It's approximately 1,000 hectares in size, so even those highest bids are optimistic. What suffers in these price wars is the quality of the data. Now, I really love stuff people say, so I collect like these sayings, like a bellbird. But so you get these comments when there are critical eyes on your budgets. As a few people implied yesterday, data is the most important part of our work. Flora identifications, inventory, and plot data. Quality data even saves time in the long run, but it's a hard sell. He's an indoor cat, by the way. He's a pest, but only to me. So there's more classics, you know. So you get these kind of comments when you bring your plants back to the office. But the more you collect, the better your data is, your flora inventory and your plot data. Identifications are quicker and easier if you have lots of good plant material to work with. Even when you know a plant, you still collect it. The taxonomy is always changing. Many species look superficially similar. We're dealing with hundreds of plants a day in the field. We don't have time to check them all. For those not familiar, that device is a plant dryer. You blow heat in underneath and it comes up through the holes in the cardboards in your plant press, and it dries the plants, which prevents mould, which destroys specimens. And that kind of mould is also associated with liver disease and cancer as well, so it's actually an occupational health and safety issue. My office assistant lets me know when it's functioning optimally. I swear I can smell heat. It's like just materialises. I know it's working. So you hear comments to the effect that the Swan Coastal Plain Survey, the Wildflower Society must have collected outside the plot to get so many species. They got that many because they do about 3 plots a day and they're very thorough. There are botanical consultants that are totally committed to quality data, but many aren't, and it's those that have the competitive advantage in competitive tendering. This creates a race to the bottom. Very briefly, this is a result of a study where I set up 4 10 by 10 metre plots in local banks of woodland. I visited them 6 times over the year, recording all observable species in each plot at the time, with credit going to the Noongar seasons for the timing. I was curious to see what effects seasonality had on plot data, thinking out-of-season surveys were our biggest problem. The seasonality wasn't really that surprising, with peak activity in September, October. The accumulated species totals were though, with plots having between 82 and 99 species in them by the end. What this means for us is we're getting off lightly doing 1 or 2 seasonal surveys. We should really be making those count. That green line provides an indication of the quality of plot data that is feeding into EIA. It's the mean of 21 plots from 6 EIA survey reports, from spring survey in local banks in woodland in very good or better condition. My study was in species-rich Banksia, which has a 5 to 10 species average. Advantage. Personally, I can do 4 plots a day before the quality of my plot data suffers. And this applies across the state because wherever you are, most plots have between 40 and 80 species in them. Going back to our role, our data is likely to represent the only records there are of ecosystems before they are destroyed. It's also a question of what kind of historical record does that green line represent. The quality of plot data also affects how well floristic analysis works, and therefore how meaningful significance assessments are, which leads to the next theme. So it's actually a fellow EIA botanist that said that to me. What we do isn't science. The Releve method, or plot-based survey, is from a science with a 100-year history. The detailed survey in our technical guidance is based on it. For those that haven't heard of it, it's phytosociology, which is a mouthful. But everyone has heard of taxonomy. Learning that just the name of it opened doors to knowledge for me. Phytosociology has rules of its own, including non-randomised sampling, which borders other branches of science, and I think is where that comments like that comes from. But it's very powerful when used as intended. There's a lot of legacy misinformation in WA. We call informal survey sites releves, and a releve is actually a plot. We call beards mapping units associations. An association means something very specific. It's a detailed classification of vegetation based on its floristic structure and habitat. Beards units are several degrees removed from that level of detail. It's a very simplistic analogy, but an association is like the vegetation equivalent of a flora species. Beards unit are more like the equivalent of a flora family. It wouldn't be considered acceptable if we did flora significance assessments at the family level. But this is what we're doing for vegetation. We do suffer from a bit of a cargo cult mentality here to biodiversity data that prevents us moving on. Beard himself said that his work wasn't an endpoint and that floristic analysis was the next step. Instead, decades later, we're still agonising over his mapping boundaries. So, for those not familiar with floristic analysis, it helps to visualise this as the plots with the most species in common clustering together, although it's more complicated than that. But. So those plot names on the left, on that side in black, are from that Swan Coastal Plain survey I was talking about before. Local TECs were defined on the basis of this study. This is getting closer to the association level, although like Beard, the authors also stated that their work was only a beginning. The red plot is one that I added to see what floristic group is aligned with. I'm using 20A as an example for the simple reason I had data for it. I know there's someone in the audience who knows much more about this than me. 20A represents state and federally listed threatened ecological community 20A, Banksia woodlands over species-rich dense shrublands. So if your methodology is consistent with the original work, you can, and the quality of the data is similar, you can recreate the work, the results of a study done 25 years ago. You can see 20A are clustered together. The grouping is the same as the original study. This repeatability is important and is why we need to be using these methods more. The reason I put this up is that 20A, you can see it's in two clusters, two groups. The red group is from the northern suburbs. It runs along the boundary of the Bassendean and the Spearwood Dunes, north to south. And then the blue group is in a band on the eastern Swan Coastal Plain, Darling Scarp boundary. It runs in a band along there. When you look at why, well, we're meant to return to the plot data and then look at why that might be. There are a few reasons, but for example, both have a dominant grass tree stratum. Except the western band looks like it might be Xantheria brunonis, while the eastern band has Xantheria presei. So there are demonstrable differences in both floristics and habitat, which I think means they are different vegetation associations. I've highlighted that M53 site in yellow for a reason. When I added more data, that geographical split is reinforced. If you notice, M53 has disappeared because I added some 20A sites from the scarp near Gingin, and they and M53 got blown out to a different part of the dendrogram. This is not invalidating the methods, it's building on them. And this is what those two floristic groups look like overlain on the distribution map for TEC20A. In practical terms, the Perth Peel strategic assessment planned for a train depot in that red band on the second largest remnant. And it was justified on the basis that the Swan coastal plain was well known and that there was lots of 20A elsewhere. So going back to our role, as EIA botanists, we're out there collecting more detailed information than anyone else has. We're supposed to be interrogating that data at a deeper level of detail than anyone else has done as well. In the same way that we regularly find new flora species, we should be finding new vegetation as well. I was wondering what that one looked like. It's a bit embarrassing, but... So support. Retaining expertise is really important. Except we have a situation where botanists are commonly leaving the profession just as they are becoming competent. It's a challenging profession, physically and mentally. Burnout is a problem. Botanists need to be mentored and supported within their organisations. We need to be consulted on matters that affect our work. That plant dryer I showed, for instance, it's very hard to get from your organisation. On the other hand, you're frequently told that what you really need is a drone. From government, we need tools to leverage better assessments. We need someone with authority to recognise and push back on bad practices. Culturally, we need to value science and technical knowledge more. I just had this story, this is one of many, but the new Conservation Science Centre, when it opened, it had a biodiversity science library. It was custom built with reinforced floors and archival climate control for archival material. Within a couple of years, the room was petitioned as an office space. The library was moved to outbuildings. Much of the material is no longer accessible, and the reference herbarium in the same building has been under similar pressure. So to finish up, I mean, there are lots of issues, but I think two key things that would help us do better flora and vegetation significance assessments are these two. There has to be a counterbalance to competitive tendering. The less prescriptive and risk-based approaches are only exacerbating that problem. Creating more uncertainty doesn't even lead to reduced green tape, and it encourages, this is my opinion, but I think it encourages opportunists who like the muddy waters. The solutions being explored, such as accreditation and penalties, risk becoming more processed that no one's willing to enforce. They're also aimed at field botanist level, which is not getting at the underlying issue. My colleague actually recently suggested that a team of botanists based in government could be doing EIA surveys. I can actually see the advantages to that in areas like quality and efficiency. But I don't know what the answer is. EIA is done everywhere. Perhaps other places have found solutions. And I'm going to finish up on my hobby horse. WA needs a consolidated, curated, centralised plot database. We've had a flora database for 20 years. Only then can we be doing meaningful significance assessments for vegetation. It will also act as a benchmark for plot data quality. It will enable analysis, modelling and mapping of our vegetation at a scale meaningful to EIA and also to conservation planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. That was really great. Any questions?
Thanks. Brett Loney.